Hey guys, welcome back. Today we are going to be talking about pruning hydrangeas, how you need to prune them, when you need to prune them, and which ones you need to prune. We are going to go over all of that today. That is probably one of the most common questions I get is how do I prune hydrangeas? And so today I want to help demystify some of the blocks that I think a lot of us face when we're pruning our hydrangeas. And it's also just like a good little refresher of which ones you need to prune, when you need to prune your hydrangeas, and how do you do it? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We are going to be working out here by our deck first, and then we will move to the front, and then I will show you another macrophylla that's in my neighbor's garden. So let's just jump right in. These are going to be the hydrangeas that we work on today. Now, if you recall, these are the ones that we planted together earlier in the summertime. These are the little lime hydrangeas, and these are a panicle type that can take pruning right now, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But they are doing so fantastic and they did so beautiful for us in the late summertime and the fall time. Now I want to come in, they're looking a little bit disheveled, so I want to come in, give them a nice little cut and just get them kind of ready for spring and summertime. So before we jump in, let's talk about the different types of hydrangeas because that will determine how you're going to be pruning yours because you do not prune all hydrangeas the same way. We can break out our hydrangeas into a few categories, starting out with big leaf hydrangeas. These are also known as Hydrangea macrophylla. These include mophead and lace cap varieties. They bloom on old wood. This means that they set buds for next year's flowers on last year's growth. Panicle hydrangeas, also known as Hydrangea paniculata, these are the ones that we're going to be working on today, are known for their cone-shaped blooms. They bloom on new wood, meaning that they set buds on current season's growth, which just means when we cut these back right now, they're going to put on new growth and bloom beautifully. Our third category of hydrangeas are going to be smooth hydrangeas. These are also known as Hydrangea arborescens. Think about Annabelles. And like panicle hydrangeas, these also bloom on new wood. And finally, we have oak leaf hydrangeas, which have the most beautiful, stunning foliage of them all, and these bloom on old wood. Now that we've gone over a little refresher course on the different varieties of hydrangeas, let's talk about when to prune them. Should you prune your hydrangeas in the early winter time or in the springtime? That really depends on your goals and what type of variety of hydrangeas that you're cutting back. Early winter pruning is going to be best for panicle and smooth hydrangeas because these bloom on new wood. This is a really great time to start pruning them back and shaping them so you can have better and stronger blooms this next season. Oak leaf and big leaf hydrangeas should be pruned in the late summertime after the flowers have faded. If you didn't get around to pruning it, you can still prune them in the springtime. However, we are not going to cut those all the way back like we do with the panicle hydrangeas. You want to wait until the buds swell to clearly see what's alive and what's dead. Deadheading or light trimming can also be done at this time. My only caveat with that is if there's already bud swelling at this time on your big leaf or your oak leaf hydrangeas, you can go ahead and start deadheading them now. You can also actually prune them back quite a bit, but you're also going to forfeit a lot of blooms by doing this. But sometimes we have really big, massive plants that need a good refresh. So it's good to come in and cut some of those branches all the way down. That way you promote new growth this new year, and then you'll have blooms the following year. Before you start pruning, make sure you have some nice sharp pruners. You can also use loppers or big shears if the stems are a little bit too thick and you quite can't get around it with your pruners. That's totally fine. These are all first year growth, so they don't have a ton of really thick stems on them. So I think these are going to work just fine. And in general, a good rule of thumb to remember is you want to cut back your plants by a third. Now, with hydrangeas, this is the great thing about them is, especially these panicle varieties, they are very forgiving when it comes to pruning. So even if you take a little bit more than you should have, that's totally fine. This is not like a haircut where it's just gonna be, oh my gosh, detrimental. It's okay because these will bounce right back with no time. You might forfeit some blooms, but in my eyes, it's better to cut back a lot of these like spindly and weaky and kind of wimpy little branches and then let that really put on more growth this season. That way next year, we can also have bigger and better blooms. The other way to approach this is by starting to cut anything that's damaged, anything that's crossing, or anything that looks diseased. That will offer a little bit of guidance on where you should start. And when I talk about these weak and kind of wimpy stems, I mean anything that's thinner than a pencil. So you see how these are really thin. They had very, very small flower heads on them. So I want to rectify that by just cutting this back pretty hard. That way we're going to start seeing better, bigger growth on all of our plants. So let's begin. Again, this is a panicle hydrangea, so we can really just cut this back. I like to come in and just do kind of a rough chop, and then we will come in and edit and start really shaping this up and being a little bit more critical of what we're going to keep and what we are going to get rid of. I just find that when you do a kind of a rough chop, it goes a little bit easier, and then you can start seeing the shape of your plant and what you need to cut back. So just like that, cut this guy too, and just move everything back. So that kind of gives us a better idea of how this plant is looking. And you can see that there's a lot of crossing branches in here, and we just want to make sure we clean that up. So now we can start by looking at anything that's dead or crossing and just, again, kind of editing that out. And when you cut these back, you're going to cut right above a bud, and I'll get you an up close shot of that. Anything that looks healthy, and again, depending on how far you want to cut back. Now with hydrangeas, when you prune them back pretty hard, you usually want to wait a couple of years. However, these were in nursery cans for a very long time. So I know I'm going to be a little bit ruthless here with them. But again, I really want to start encouraging better growth with all of our plants. So I don't mind cutting them back pretty hard, and then just being patient with how they're going to be blooming for us this next year. So you see anything that's like super spindly here, I'm just gonna cut that right off. And same here, I'm gonna cut these back a bit. All right, that looks a lot better. I know that looks a little bit dramatic, but remember, these hydrangeas are very forgiving, and they have beautiful big bloom heads. And if they don't have the right support system, as in their branches to support those blooms, they're just going to flop over. And that's often what happens around midsummer into fall. You just start seeing them looking a little sad. So by doing this, I want to start encouraging those bigger, healthier stems. That way our hydrangeas are not flopping over so much. So I know this is, again, very drastic, but in the long run, it's going to be beautiful. Now I'll go ahead and just start pruning all of these other guys back as well. And I'll just say one thing, if it's still hard for you to see where those buds are, you can wait a little bit longer until they're a little bit more visible. I know it can be a little bit tricky this time of year to see them. All right, these look way better. I did take quite a bit off. Again, if you do cut them back pretty hard, it's recommended that you wait a couple of years. But I have had these plants for a very long time, and I just feel like they needed a good pruning. They were asking me for it. So we cut quite a bit off, but I think they're going to do beautiful for us in the springtime and summertime. Now let me show you one of my neighbor's big leaf hydrangeas, and then we'll quickly prune up our Annabelle hydrangea up in the front. Now here's one of my neighbor's macrophyllus, and you can see these are very, very massive and they need a good pruning back. Now it looks like they did already start cutting it back, but with these, you can leave them up all winter long like this and come in the springtime when the buds are a little bit more swollen, and then you can cut them right above that swelling. These you don't want to cut all the way back, because if you do, you're going to forfeit a lot of blooms. Again, with that caveat that this is a pretty massive hydrangea, and so I would recommend that they come in and forfeit some of the blooms and cut some of these branches all the way back, because if you just let them grow, which you can totally allow your plants to do that, that's totally fine. It just depends what you want out of it. But sometimes you can start having a lot of dead branches in between, and so the plant might look a little bit messy and a little bit bushy. Now these I think look beautiful, although I do think they can come in and thin it out a little bit. This is such a glorious hydrangea, and every time I walk by I just admire these so much. But again, just keep that in mind. If you have the macrophylla, you don't want to cut them down like we just did with our panicles, unless you're okay with forfeiting some of those blooms for this following season. Here is an Annabelle that we're going to be cutting back as well. This one got really kind of out of control. And this is also a good time to address anything that was diseased. Make sure you're not leaving anything behind on the ground if it was diseased for you last season. All right, much better. All right, guys, well, that will do it for today's hydrangea pruning video. I hope this was useful and you can use this guide as a reference moving forward if you ever run into any problems for pruning your own hydrangeas. And again, I hope it also demystifies some of the confusions that we might have when we're pruning hydrangeas, whether it's when to prune them, how to prune them, and which ones do I prune back, and which ones do I kind of wait and just kind of deadhead and leave alone. And remember, pruning hydrangeas isn't just about shaping them to look beautiful. It's also about encouraging growth and maximizing blooms. Removing those dead and weak stems encourages your plant to direct energy into producing bigger and healthy stems, thus producing better and bigger blooms. Which of course, who doesn't want bigger, beautiful, and healthier flowers overall in their garden? I hope this video was helpful, and now you have the tools to go out into your own garden with confidence and prune back your hydrangeas, at least the ones that need to be pruned back right now. And that way you can get them ready for springtime and summertime and that beautiful show that they're going to put on. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today in my garden, and I'll see you guys in our next video. Bye-bye.